Maybe I'll get this guy to post it online. All right, well, it is 7 o'clock. Welcome all to LiTFUSE. Welcome to our online audience. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to start by acknowledging that Tieton Arts and Humanities resides on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation. Tieton Arts and Humanities values all relationships that reinforce our commitment to art as a powerful tool for equity and diversity. In recognizing the history and respecting the sovereignty of Washington's Indian nations, Tieton Arts and Humanities recognizes and honors these first people and their significant role today in stewarding these lands as they continue to honor and uphold their ancient heritage. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our online audience. Besides the thanks to all of you, I'd like to acknowledge our appreciation of the financial contributions of many of our donors that make it possible to make this event. I'd like to thank Poetry Foundation, Humanities Washington, National Endowment for the Humanities, Washington State Arts Commission, National Endowment for the Arts, Fresh Hop Ale Festival, Yakima Chief Hops, Dispirin Foundation, Yakima Valley Community Foundation, Inklings Bookstore, LiTFUSE, Yakima Coffee House Poets, and many other private donors. And a special shout out to Jen, do you pronounce it Alholm? Alholm, for our wonderful dinner tonight. And while Fuel is a free event, I do encourage those of you who do have means to consider donating or sponsoring a specific portion, as Jen has done with the food tonight. It's just as a way to ensure our longevity of the program. Really, our heart at LiTFUSE is to make poetry available and accessible to all those who can afford it and those who can't. So if you do have means, please contribute to that cause so that we can make poetry available to the entire community. I do want to remind you, some of you probably already needed, but the bathroom is outside, old gas station. You don't need a key or a hubcap, but it is available to you on the outside of the building. And then I also want to remind you, as we've done in the past, some new people here, but after our featured reader Maya reads tonight, there will be a time of questions and answers. So if there's anything that you would like to know specifically about the work that she reads, about craft, about poetry in general, about even publication, any of those questions, teaching, classes, all of that, she's fair game. So So now I would like to introduce, and I'm going to go ahead and read her. I was just going to do a personal introduction to her, but I do want to read her bio because she's got some pretty cool stuff out there, and I want to read this. Maya is the author of several books, including the interdisciplinary collaboration Alchemy for Cells and Other Beasts, the chapbook Yesterday the Bees, and the poetry collection Rustfish, as well as co-editor with Sharma Shields of the anthology Evergreen, Grim Tales and Fables from the Gloomy Northwest, Scatland Books 2021. She deeply appreciates the opportunities her writing creates in her life, such as travel to Oxford University, or travel into forests and fields, which I know is her love, and lifting other writers, which she is incredible at. Maya finds deep joy in human connection and teaching, as well, whether at conferences, festivals, associate professor of English at Central Washington University, or as affiliate faculty for Western Colorado's low residency MFA. Her current works in progress are a memoir called Raised by Ferns, which is still seeking a home, and I've had the privilege of seeing a couple of those pieces, so be looking for that. And an academic textbook, Advanced Poetry Pathways into Poetic Lineages, under contract with Bloomsbury. Maya is a good friend and my poetry mentor. Maya is very gifted in finding the best in people and meeting them right where they're at and lifting them up. Like she said, I mean that's a joy of hers is to lift poets up and help them to become who they were meant to be. And I am very appreciative to Maya, and even some of this space really is here and encouraged by Maya. Maya taught me so much about how important poetry community is, and that's a lot of why we're here tonight. So would you all please join me in welcoming Maya Jewell Zeller.
Personal intros, right? Jen is really special to me, and actually it means a lot to me that I'm here, because Jen and I met several years ago, as she mentioned, at Central Washington University, and we had this really beautiful moment where we were talking about this Kay Ryan poem, Houdini, where Houdini's breaking out of the chains, and we kind of talked about how the poem is this ars poetica, and she left class, and she was just really, really into poetry that quarter, came back the next day and said, Maya, do you know there's poetry everywhere? There's poetry in the grasses that are waving, there's poetry, and she was just really, really lit up with it, and we both got jazzed and just started saying, there's poetry in this and this, and we just had this wonderful conversation. That was the very beginning, actually, of knowing each other in that class, and I think it was the second day of class that we just went on. I think you stayed after class for 30 minutes. And we just talked about all the poetry that we saw in the world after reading the Houdini poem and talking about it together, and just really have connected on that ever since. And then we've shared so many experiences. So it means so much to me to be here with you, Jen, in this space and with this community and with people in Central Washington who love land and love poetry and language as much as we do. So thank you. And I also want to thank, obviously, the Tieton Arts and Humanities, and Jen for that amazing meal. Thank you so much. I feel nourished. So well fed, and I ate 2 rolls and so much food. So, anyway, not always a big eater, I get nervous. But, so thank you for being here, and I'm really excited to hear your words tonight. I'm going to read a little bit of work from a few different things, so apologies for the stacks, but I want to start with a couple of poems from my first book, Rustfish, which, if you don't know Lost Horse Press is this little press in Sandpoint, Idaho. They've now moved to Liberty Lake, but the publisher, Christine Holberg, started this Ukrainian poetry series a few years ago, where she publishes translations of Ukrainian poets, and she was doing this before the crisis and conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And since then has gotten Ilya Kaminsky involved, and she gives so many of the proceeds to help Ukrainian refugees, and she's just doing this amazing work. And so I knew her before that, and I just feel so incredibly lucky to be working with this person who cares so much about giving back. So anyway, so if you don't know Lost Horse Press, check it out, check out the Ukrainian poetry series. I'm not in that series, but that's why you should go to the press. So this is from, these are poems from Rustfish, which is from the press. So I grew up in Washington State, here in Washington State, and was born in Northwest Oregon, but grew up mostly in Southwest Washington. And if you've been down State Route 4 out toward Astoria, Oregon, and you've gone around that part of the state, you've maybe been to Seaview. which is this little town at the intersection of 101 and State Route 4. Am I getting that wrong now? Maybe I got it wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, my brain's a little fuzzy tonight. And my dad and brother have a little tire shop there. It's called Tire Hut. And so I like to open with this poem because it kind of gives a little bit of background. I like to tell stories, and I won't go on about them. This poem tells you a bit about my background. So Tire Hut, Seaview, Washington. The shop is divided like the brain. On one side, dull metals lie crooked, like limbs after wind. Men shout things to each other and no one. Buckets of bolts line the wall where red and blue rags hang from nails, already black with grease. A generator or tire balancer shakes the floor, as if the ocean were under it, pushing up, and the air tastes like batteries. This is where the work gets done. But the customer comes in to wait on the other side, sees tires splayed out in pretty rows. This one for $59, this one for $70, this set on sale, buy 3, get the 4th free. Posters of babies erupting from lying down tires. Tables with shiny magazines to lift and touch, and everywhere the smell of new coffee, sweet gasoline. Outside is a half barrel, steel or some other metal, rust-colored now. It catches the rain. My father and brother keep it there to drown tires in, to see where the leak is. The water is the cleanest water you've ever seen. No kidding. You can look into that water and see the mountain from which it came. You're very, you don't have to make a club, but after every song that you're welcome to do whatever makes you feel happy. And it's actually kind of warm in here, so let's take off my sweater. Are you warm?
Yeah, I'm warm.
It feels good. It feels so good because it's chilly, but it's kind of awesome. Okay, so I'm going to read one more from Rustfish, and this one's called Something Like Singing in the Rain, and you know the song, right? Singing in the rain, just singing in the rain, you know the song, right? So that's what you need to know, and then the other thing you need to know is that I have 2 children, but when I wrote this poem, I didn't have any children, and I had never given birth, and that will make sense when I begin to read. Something like singing in the rain. I dreamed I was giving birth. It was much easier than I had expected. The pushing was like playing an accordion. Or maybe the last 3 miles of a marathon, or being a custodian. Summers in undergrad, I cleaned toilets, dorm rooms for $7.14 an hour, washed the dust from plastic fig trees in common rooms, while seasonal boarders played ping pong or microwaved ramen for lunch, noodles slimy as organs in a bowl of speckled fluid. The baby came all at once, like rain in Southwest Washington. Like the monsoon that fills cranberry bogs so the men in rubber boots don't even have to use the long black hoses set up for harvest. When that rain comes, we pull over and turn off our music. It is a no radio kind of rain. Sometimes it lasts 5 minutes. You think the roads might fill up and the cars float away. You think a seagull might flash suddenly across the glass. And then the rain stops. All along the highway, cars have their lights on. You can look and see rows and rows just sitting as if it's the end of the world. And then, one by one, they all get back into their lanes, turn on their radios. The DJs don't even know. They're miles away in Seattle or Portland, where people think it rains like that, but it doesn't. It only rains like that, where cars sometimes get radio and sometimes not. The baby wasn't crying, it was humming. Now I've made you shy, right? You're like, I don't know what to do. She told us to not clap, we don't know what to do. So I'm reading this one actually because you can snap. Because my husband Chris asked me to. I said, which poem should I read? And he said, I want you to read the one about your dad's Corvette. So it's funny because my dad never drove the Corvette. I never saw him drive it once. Craig says, it's all there. The stuff no one wants to say is theirs anymore. The single slate pool table, the 6-person tent, an entire professional tattoo set, complete with analog power supply. And my father's 1998 Corvette. He's no longer sad to see it go, though he does lament, my mother tells me, that young people these days no longer want something like it. They want a car with good mileage, something they can take a child to preschool in, cart around the 6-person tent. My mother stands at the sink telling me this. dumping cucumber peels into the old Folgers container she uses for compost, scrubbing down a pot with steel wool. Or at least I imagine she does. She tells me on the phone, while I lean over these soapy dishes and watch my neighbor mow her lawn, to and fro like a metronome, her long hair switching across her back when she turns. I think of the tan line it could leave, the way our bodies hold shadows of what they aren't anymore. I think of her husband still healing from a broken leg. He wakes at dawn to work the good part of the day at the Air Force Base, his crutches moving him over the tarmac while men shout and wave. He loves his wife. I have seen him bring her coffee in the cold, dark hours of winter mornings, when on his days off he wakes long before he must want to, pulls up below me in his white sedan, crosses his short expanse of yard, holding those cups as if he holds the whole night in his hands. He does not want to spill any of it. He does not know I am watching. It is early. This is love. I know he must have been up until the moon crested high over Monroe Street, competing with the taverns at 1 a.m., making its slow journey toward Orion. I want to buy him my father's Corvette. I want him to take his lawn-mowing wife for a ride. They are the kind of young people who might make use of that car if they had it. I can see him now, driving with his son in the hills above the city, his tattooed arm comfortable on the window, the other cocked lively at the wheel. My father, when he was young, had a tattoo done that says Marie. We used to tell my sister it was for her middle name, before she was old enough to figure out lies, to see the difference between what a person keeps and what he sells, between what someone is and what he could have been. Okay, so I'm going to read just one poem from Yesterday the Bees, which is a chapbook. And I like to talk about the presses, because I think the presses that support us are also part of that community. And I love this press, Floating Bridge Press, and you might know its president now, Michael Schmelzer, who was here, I think, 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago here in Tieton. And Michael and I had this really special connection. The year that he won this prize, I was the finalist, and we got our books published together. And so we read together, and it was pouring down rain in Seattle, and we signed each other's books under the tailgate. We had the thing up over the car, and we were under there, and we had this really wonderful picture. And he's just been such a supporter of everyone around him, and he and I kind of grew up in poetry together. We kind of had our first chapbooks published together, and then have moved forward, and we still stay in touch. And then he became president of Floating Bridge Press, which publishes only Washington State poets. So if you're a Washington State poet and you want to get started and you want to send your chapbook to Floating Bridge Press for their contest, you've got a shot of being a part of this community, which just moves forward on and on and on and nurtures. I think you've had Jory here too, right? Not Jory, okay. I couldn't remember who'd been here from Floating Bridge, but so you probably know. You can throw a stone in Washington State, right? You can hit a Floating Bridge poet. So anyway, this is from a chapbook, Yesterday the Bees, which came out in 2015, and Yesterday the Bees refers to the title poem, which I won't read. I probably should read when I talk about this book, but it's yesterday. I'll just say, yesterday the bees were waist high in the blue weed. I am not going to say the obvious, that this plant is like me, a second generation immigrant. What do I have for the bees? And the idea is that the bees are passing, and it's about lineage, and it's about invasive species and naturalized species, and all those things come together in the book. So this is far into it, and this is the book is dedicated to my daughter, Zoe, and this is far into the book, and it's kind of explaining family lineage, and this is a poem about her father, and so I'm reading that even though she's not here, it's for him, so this is to her about him, and it's a prose poem, and we all know prose poems, right? I'm sorry, I'm a teacher, so I have to do this. So the prose poem, a lot of poetry that we traditionally read is lineated and has enjambment and line breaks. And a prose poem, the poet Melissa Posney says, is one continuous unenjambed line. So think of it as it had to take that one breath that just was the continuous momentum of the ongoing line and squish it into a box. And that's a prose poem. Or, as Stefan Mallarmé said, poets have composed too long by their music stands. We are sick of that, and we need to go compose in the corner. So that's why he justified the prose poem, the French symbolist Stefan Mallarmé. Okay, anyway, prose poem, what you need to know about your father. Now I will tell you about your father. He is the thin man running up the rock-pocked mountain, the pine wind his anthem. The river so far below, he can see it splitting into several rivers. So finite, it could be the long hair we finally cut from your head a month ago, falling its delicate fall to the kitchen floor. This was the hair of your birth, the dark strand that grew lighter and longer, while the rest lightened and curled. Your father was holding the camera. I held the scissors, careful not to let the blades touch your skin. Your father was on a hill above Spokane because he owns the air. I am your mother. I am the one who held you close to me for over a year, like a marsupial, feeling like I could lose you any moment. Feeling what every mother feels, what the cameras cannot document, jewel molecules, the tree trembling in its core. Every fantasy I had was a daymare, a dream of your head getting dashed on the rocks we hiked over, or a flash of you being torn apart by a dog, your body spread on the pavement. It is difficult to be a mother, but this poem is about your father. How, after your haircut, after your afternoon play, when you slept on your bed with your mouth open and that strangely straight line across your forehead, he held me while I cried, while I lamented your lost babyhood, the last visible part of you that could be traced to our time together as one person. Your father swept my own hair from my eyes, opened the curtains. Beyond the maple trees, bare and cold with winter, beyond the brick building across the street, the sun was still doing its thing, the last orange of it lighting up between houses, fences, and cars. Your father told me not to think about how it would soon disappear. What a really nice group of people. I'm excited to hear your work. I can stop now and I can start. Jen told me I have to read for 30 minutes. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to read two poems from this next collection, Alchemy for Cells and Other Beasts, and another Pacific Northwest Press, Entre Rios Books, which is based out of Seattle, and they are a gay press queerly run. Knox and Victor, partners. Victor works at Google, he funds the whole press, and Knox just goes nuts designing books and inviting people to collaborate, which is this wonderful, wonderful thing. And when I was invited to collaborate on this book, I had never done a poetic collaboration of this scale. I'd done little things with, people here and there. But Knox, the publisher, is fantastic. He goes to writing conferences and he meets people, and then he gives them his business card, and then he just pretends to be really low-key, this guy who's just smoking pot in his trailer. And then a few months later, he sends you an email and he says, do you want to collaborate on a book? I'm working on this book with this artist, Carrie DeBacher, and I really need a poet, and I think you're the poet. And you're like, I don't really know. I just met you randomly at a writing conference, and I don't really know you, and I don't know if I know how to collaborate with this fantastic visual artist. And then he coaxes you for months and kind of courts you and seduces you into it. So you find yourself collaborating with this amazing watercolor artist who paints watercolor on gouache paper, and this is what her work looks like. It looks like this. I mean, it's sort of incredible. I don't do, well, we all kind of dabble, but mine's terrible. So I don't do anything real with watercolor. So I just thought she was fabulous, and we collaborated on this whole collection by giving each other art. So I would send her poems and she would paint, she would send me paintings and I would write, and we just kept doing this back and forth. And by the time the book was put together, I don't even know exactly which poems go with which paintings, and so we just let Carrie and Knox just put it together. The artist and the publisher just arranged it. And sometimes I thought, well, that actually goes with that, but who cares? I mean, it was this beautiful experience where the art kind of was taken out of my hands and put into someone else's, and I can't recommend highly enough. Are you collaborators? How many people here are collaborators? You're probably like, yeah, I already know this all the time. Okay, so a lot of people here are collaborators. If you've never collaborated, right, we can't recommend it highly enough. It changes your art. It changes what you do. And for me, it turned my writing into spells. I started writing spells. It was spell for this and spell for that. They all came out as spells. Yeah, it was weird. Cool. So this one doesn't sound like a spell after I just said that, but this is early on in the book. And this one's called The Waiting. And this is when I was trying to figure out what the book was doing and how to write poems. The Waiting. It was not the hour of red-flecked birds. It was not the hour of wood smoke. It was not the hour of the exquisite chirping of trees. It was not the hour of ice cream, guitar, or warm bricks, ice skating, of neon celebration. This was no hour for a child. I put on my mask and walked into the mountain. I pushed right through the stone. I wore a necklace of furred insects, emerged in a forest, stepped into a boat. I rocked inside the seismic proportions. I drew a knife from my belly, plundered the lake. I put on my wolf head, my girl arms, my quiver of bodies. I put on my blood and it put me on. I was a scrub grub, a cold bug, a sharp blade, a self reaching into a self, a whole. It was my hour of fluttering hands, hands like wings, hands like a red streak. The red streak was me. There were no birds. The trees sang a dirge. I dipped my head into the bile, pulled it up with my name like a tongue clenched between my teeth. So this book kind of, what happened was we floundered for a while. And then Donald Trump was elected president, and we said we just can't do this. And we finally met in person. We've been sending things back and forth over the internet, and we finally met in person in a coffee shop. And while we were kind of talking about what had worked and what hadn't worked, this parade of high school kids walked by holding "Love is Everyone" signs and "You Can't Stop Us from Love," just this great, amazing group of kids that was protesting the election. And both the artist and I started crying, and then we talked about how women's bodies had been medicalized and how there was this kind of military invasion of women's rights that was surging in the beginning then. And so the book actually kind of came a lot out of that, and it kind of pushed against the Trump presidency. And so there's a lot of poems about science, a lot of poems that are merging kind of the subconscious surrealist experience and rights of everyone against those oppressive forces. And so the book kind of ended up being in that space. So the next poem that I'll read is a spell, but in addition to being influenced by art, I was reading a lot, as we always are, and I was revisiting Hopkins, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and so I'm just going to read a tiny Hopkins poem, because if you don't know it, you must. It's The Windhover. Do you know this poem? Yeah, okay, you all know it. Should I just skip it? I'm kidding, I'm going to read it. Okay, The Windhover. And a windhover is another name for a kestrel, and they kind of do this in the air. Okay, so, The Windhover. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dappled dawn drawn falcon, in his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing, in his ecstasy, then off forth on swing, as a skate's heels sweep smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. Brute, beauty, and valor and act, oh air, pride, plume, here buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee, then a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, oh my chevalier. No wonder of it, sheer plod makes plow down Cillian shine, and blue beak embers, ah, my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion. Right?
Yeah.
My heart in hiding stirred for a bird. That's one of my favorite lines in poetry of all time. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird. And you know when you're walking across a field and you're just kind of like walking along, you're chatting, and then bird, and you go, my heart in hiding stirred for a bird. You know when you do that. We all do that. So I love response poems. I love the imitation and response. And so this is a poem for Gerard Manley Hopkins, and it's called Little Spell for Kestrel Hovering, for X-ray and Mothering. And this poem is a prose poem too, but it uses backslashes, which unless you see them on the page, probably aren't necessary to mention, except that they denote for me a pause that's shorter than a comma, the comma being half of a, so a line break being a half comma, and the comma being like a quarter, half of a period, and the backslash for me being a half of that. So thinking about the ways that pause happens and doesn't happen, so the backslash is like this little imagistic pause, or a little caesura, where you gather your thoughts and you kind of put the image in a little chunk, and then you barrel forward in that one momentous ongoing line of the prose poem. So the backslash is just like, don't stop fully, but just stop a little bit in your thoughts, but don't actually stop in your breath, right? Okay. If that made any sense at all.
No.
You got it, okay, thank you. Little spell for kestrel hovering, for x-ray and mothering. If you watch in slow motion the flecked kestrel on YouTube, you'll watch your own lungs fanning out against the sun. Sweet girl made of marchlight through a seed pod, how delta the vein and heart, highways of breath of atmospheric capacity fluctuating 20 times a minute, like fleck on feather. Remember smiling? Remember your joy wrinkles? You could fix your eyes on this bird as if it holds a wavelength in the electromagnetic spectrum, while it stays in one place above the rocky cliffs, while it hunts, barely wind ruffled on the heather, while it lands feasting with that beautiful beak, literally eating the small snake alive. Below this spectacle, so many colorful tents on the beaches, people picnicking on dead meat and building castles and dressing and undressing their wingless offspring, those lumpy but language-gifted gods. Okay, so I'm going to read just one more poem, and then I have a short excerpt from an essay. Jen said it was okay if I genre jump, so I'm going to do it. So I like to think a lot about, like we all do, the ways that research and science and myth and literature and religion can kind of braid together in a poem. And after I was working on this collection, I was writing more and more braided poems that just got longer and kind of wove those elements. And I think of them as partial, and this is like ekphrasis, so partial ekphrasis, partial docu-poetic, partial narrative, and I just kind of like to move through those forms. So this is a braided poem. It has some common ground with essays, so I'm reading it before that, and it's 2 pages. It's called The Question of Lilith, and I think you're all nodding, so Lilith, I'm not going to explain Lilith, you know who Lilith is, so, okay. The Question of Lilith. And in this one, you can tell the speaker, who is also me, has children, and they're in the poem a little roughly. You can kind of see them coming in. After reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, with its wild queen and civil animals, my daughter comes to me asking. I want to tell her about the way one accused might find respite in thistles and vines, about fresh berries to sustain a body, bees, and that tangled thicket to keep the masses at bay. Already, my young children understand quiet, the way a space of one's own allows the brain to wander, how between the structures of our world are hallways and alleys and crevices where spiders spin their intricate, delicate webs and shadows quake their wordless interrogations on walls of stone and creek beds filled with light and slight new fish waiting for the earth to spin its small distance and rain to fall and all to be right for their safe passage to the ocean. I never could believe there was one man and one woman, Eve just flesh on Adam's extracted rib, like a cesarean birth, how the wound supposedly just closed and healed with no pain or complications, flesh forming breasts and fingers and a dark hollow where more life might be called forth fully developed, that from these bodies came all our bodies, writhing and assembling, briars coating a garden in their shadowed leaves and thorns. Even twice, growing my own delicate embryos, sensing each flutter as they began to move steadily to the booming koans rippling this frat house of a body, those dance moves they bust and their eyebrows coming in ready for expression. Even then, participating in this miracle, each baby cut out of me and each of us going on with our lives as if it was nothing, even then I could not imagine. What is a person? Science tells us mapping the human genome indicates a minimum population of 10,000. The same number of hours Gladwell suggests we practice to achieve mastery. My daughter comes to me with questions of time and space, of sex and evil, and I falter, wanting to give her my knowledge, fearing no matter what I say, she'll still make 10,000 mistakes before she begins to understand. What hand holds the wand that moves her? What wind opens the door? Could anything written in Isaiah 34 have come to pass? Wildcats meeting with desert beasts, satyrs calling to one another, castles overgrown, and Lilith there resting with those paired kites and hoot owls? I laugh it off. But my daughter comes to me with questions, and I kiss her forehead, pull her into my lap. I put down my books and begin in the middle, where the wind lives, where other stories fall into silence. So I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna read part of the essay. It's happening. It's happening. So I haven't been writing poetry actually very much at all in the past couple of years. I've been working on short stories and an academic textbook, and on this memoir project, which contains essays, and each essay is its own complete entity, but they also build together into a memoir. And so the first, I just rearranged it. It's so fun to work on a memoir. I can't recommend it highly enough. Just write little chunks, just write essays, and then just put them together. You can call them chapters. It doesn't really matter. They don't make a difference. So this is the first one of the collection now, and I'm really interested in lyric shapes, and like I said, the braided essays, and the idea of form and function, and the poem, wandering little drift of sound that you follow in the woods, the bird, the merry ripple. We follow that thrush. And I'm really interested in the way that an essay can be like a poem, and the ways that we can make up our own rules and our own forms. And so you'll kind of see that happening. And I'm only going to read the first few pages of this, and then I'll tell you that if you want to read the rest of it, you can find it online at the Rumpus. So you'll be able to read it on your own if you want to. So it's called Complete the Sentence. I feel like it's later than I thought. Maybe I'm fine. Am I okay? Okay, for a little bit. Yeah. It'll be and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions. Okay. All right. Maybe I'll stop. Complete the sentence. My 7-year-old son comes home with a worksheet from this week's spelling practice. Directions. Look at this week's spelling words in the box below. Then write a spelling word to complete each sentence. Roast, going, both, float, grow, loaf, cold, bowl, throw, soap. The choices begin like this. 1. Do you think the pen will sink or blank? We baked a fresh blank for dinner. We baked a fresh bowl for dinner? I wonder. Do you think the pen will sink or grow? Do you think a pen will sink or throw? Sure. This could be a very delightful exercise, I think to myself. My 10-year-old daughter explains that you just guess what they want you to put. You just try to think of what your teacher would do, she says, and you do that. Her brother has gotten 2 wrong. They are numbers 4 and 8, which he has transposed. Mom will make her pot cold on Saturday. The wind made the weather feel roast. Yes, I think. Mom will make her pot cold on Saturday. It has been warm from tea all week. On Saturday, she will wash it and put it away. Or maybe her cold outdoor pots have been full of ferns. She needs to move indoors. Warm wind does make the weather feel quite roast. What's roast? My son asks. It means hot, we explain. Or I say pot roast is a cooked meat in a crock pot. Ew, says my son. He does not eat meat, and perhaps not uncoincidentally has never had, nor seen, nor heard of pot roast. I have never made it. I have not made it on Saturday, and I have not made it any other day. I see the problem. The question had no cultural context for him, as it would have no cultural context for any child who had never heard of a pot roast, or who doesn't use shampoo or soap when they shower, or who doesn't bake a fresh loaf for dinner, or who doesn't eat a bowl of cereal before school. The test has quite a bit of cognitive dissonance for those children, I explained to mine. It's a problem of cultural literacy. We know, says the 10-year-old. When you were a child, this would have been confusing to you. No, I say, I read and I understood predictions, so I imagined what they would want like you do, and then I would answer based on context clues. Like on the SAT, says my children's father. What's the SAT, says our daughter. It's a test, not for your mom. But I did okay. Yeah, she did okay because she could guess. She did a little better than me, he says. But she should have done a lot better. She's smarter. It's just the test was made more for me. I had taken Latin. What are the questions like? Our daughter asks. Her father thinks, like this. A branch is to a tree as a chair is to a... Me. Oh, I know this one. As a child, I would have thought A, barn, or B, furniture store. But the answer is C, living room. No, says my 10-year-old. It's table. My husband gives me the pity look. Yeah, table. It's table, man. Oh, I say quietly. I thought it was living room. I thought that would be right. I didn't even think of table. See, my husband says to our children, the test wasn't made for your mom. But, I say proudly, our family would do very well on Family Feud. We know how to help each other, I say. We know how to work together. No, says my husband, you're not the demographic for that either. You have no idea how to imagine America. My friend Ellie tells me later, it's dining set. She was raised outside of Boston. I look at a practice SAT question from the internet. It goes like this. Directions. In the following question, a related pair of words or phrases is followed by 5 pairs of words or phrases. Choose the pair that best expresses a relationship similar to that in the original pair. Medicine is to illness as hunger is to thirst, etiquette is to discipline, law is to anarchy, love is to treason, or stimulant is to sensitivity. I hold 2 degrees from reputable institutions of higher learning. Both of my degrees are related to the English language and its usage. I do not initially see the clear answer to this practice question. I reason it out. Medicine heals illness. Which of the other word pairs is about healing? Hunger heals thirst? When I was gone a long time from the house, in the forest, along the river, or hauling hay from a neighbor's field and getting hungry, I had a few tactics. Drink more water, eat what's edible in season, salmon berries, thimbleberries, blackberries, huckleberries. If nothing's in season, chew a grass stem, drink the nectar from a clover. Do a bee dance. Pretend it's not raining. Huddle in the barn and write a story in your head. We're children who somehow lost their parents. Our library books taught us the rules of YA Lit. Outside, the staccato pings on the barn's roof, the same rhythm as flitting trout in the shallows. Walk in the rain and pretend you're a fish. The air carrying the waft of cow manure off the field fog. My hens mud-soaked and frayed. I could strip off these clothes and hang them by the wood stove, heat water, drink more tea. We usually had eggs from the chickens and salmon from the river. If we didn't, we would again soon. Walk in the rain and pretend you're a fish. Go in the house and get dry clothes. What was I thirsty for? What hunger could possibly heal it? I'm not going to read any more from this. You can find it online. So that's the end. I'll tell you that it keeps going through and it takes each of those possible answers and it uses narrative to kind of unfold them. And then it gets to a point where the speaker is really confused and she ends up saying the answer, which is law heals anarchy, is the answer they want, but she knows it isn't true. And then it keeps going through and using more questions from the SAT and answering those questions by essentially unfolding them and saying that's well, I'll just let you keep reading it. But the idea is that it unfolds by asking what answers are possible, and it's asking more questions and answers. So I'll just stop there, and that was my transition into Q&A, questions and answers. Kind of an awkward one at that, but I would love to take questions. I would love to hear about your work, and I would love to address any big questions that Jen said we could ask. I think you said we can ask anything. That was a huge invitation, and I'm going to honor it.
Within reason.
Within reason? Yeah, within reason. Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
I finished my autobiography, only I wrote it in the third person because I couldn't get to it to myself. But I did it as an ABC diary, so I just picked things like animals, business, caregiving, my story.
Is it like an encyclopedia? So it's an abecedarian. Did you do it like an encyclopedia?
Well, on my animals.
All your animals. Okay, got it.
I wrote stories about my and I wrote all my little stories about a caregiver. And then I went all the way to women, and then I did Black very much.
That's a while.
But what I'm saying is I did that, I had no idea how to tell the whole story. And then it kind of spun out, and pretty soon I realized that it was a whole tapestry because all these things came back, the animals, the horses, So, did your SAT thing start to weave a whole tapestry that you had no idea was going to be?
Yeah, so when I started writing this essay, so the way that I write, it sounds like this is the way that you write too. I kind of come up with a little word or a phrase or a piece of music and then I just follow it. It's like the thrush in the woods. So I didn't have the structure of this laid out. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this. But once I had that first question from the SAT, medicine is the illness as, then I just unfolded from there. But then once that one is completed, then it shifts. And there's a section where I start making things up. So it's, I come up with the question
introduction, Maya is to college as daughter is to certainty, mud is to him, Maya's dad is to DUI, darn is to sock, casual debt is to middle class. And then I go through and kind of talk about those. So I end up making up my own SAT questions and then kind of pushing the essay form further into those. And more and more is revealed about the narrator's thinking patterns through making up questions.
Did you say in the present? I mean, I was trying to do 80 years of
Oh,
life.
did I jump around? Yeah, sorry.
I was trying to cover my whole life, but I didn't know how to do it from the beginning to the end. I just did little rezones, you know, like.
Yeah, I love the rhizomatic structure. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, no, I love that, thank you. So it's like the splitting of the iris bolts, right? So they're all underground, and those are the parent. Yeah, it's fantastic. In this essay, I didn't cover the whole life. I really just stayed between the children and the family unit, and then I jump into the past and I jump back and forth between the present and the past in this essay. And then in other essays in the book, some of them are in third person actually, and some are in second person, so I use all the points of view, and then they kind of weave together. I never tell the complete story of life. I actually leave a lot out. They're just, impossible to tell your whole life. But yeah, it doesn't cover the whole biograph or autobiographical arc. It just kind of dips in and out of moments. And the memoir has a lot of pulling between the privilege that I am living in now, which I think is pretty extreme. I get to teach at university, I get to work with people who are first generation university students and sometimes not first generation and non-traditional, and it's just a huge privilege. That job is amazing to me. And then sometimes the privilege of childhood, which was just wandering without any structure and fields, and sometimes just really hungry and not having any food. So there was this kind of tension between the privileges and the poverty of the life that I live now, the poverty being lack of time to wander in fields, and the privilege and poverty of youth. And so the memoir kind of goes back and forth between those two times and asks questions about what privilege really is and what poverty is and what simplicity is and what does it mean to have access and what does it mean to not have access. So it also kind of wrestles with America, and I think of myself as a person who had many privileges, because even as a person who lived in rural America, I was a person who is white presenting, and you don't see my half immigrant status when you meet me, so you don't know that those invisible things exist. And if you're a person in America who doesn't come from those kinds of privileges, how much more difficult is it? And how many more we know these things, but it kind of wrestles with those systemic disadvantages and advantages. And then it also asks questions of what is privilege, what is poverty? So, yeah. But it's not published, so, the essays, some of them are, but it's looking for a home, so. If you know somebody who wants to pay me lots of money for it, I'm just kidding. wants to give it a fun. What are some other questions from people? We have a couple minutes.
Did you have a particular idea or mindset when you started the process of doing the memoir?
So I am not a storyboarder, and I write essays, and I think I wrote the memoir much in the same way that I write poems and poetry books, which is moment by moment. I'm really kind of a fragmented thinker. I don't think with a clear linear narrative, and I don't really understand clear linear narrative as well. It just doesn't function with the way my brain functions. So when I started writing the memoir, I didn't know I was writing a memoir. I was writing essays, and I wrote this one called The Privilege Button, which I reprised in Recipient for Humanities, Washington, at one of those bedtime stories events. And afterwards, a friend of mine said, "Maya, you could write a whole book based on that one essay." And it was about living in an HOA, a homeowners association, after living. So it was kind of doing a similar thing to this, but with different content. And so I set out initially with a collection of about 8 essays that I'd already written and thought about how they worked together. And then I tried to figure out, based on that, the conversation that they were having with each other, what the book might do. And so then I just started writing more and more essays. And at first, there were some really bad essays. And they didn't seem to match with what the book was doing, and I still didn't know what the book was doing. I had to kind of write my way into it. And I think I was about 200 pages into it when they started rolling. And then I just pulled the old essays out. And so it kind of grew out of like the rhizomatic structure. You could take all the old iris bolts and just toss them. And it was really the new ones that were blooming flowers. So I didn't have a structure for it at first, and then after a while I did. And I'm still wrestling it. I just moved this essay to the front. It was in section 3, and I just moved it to the front because the book didn't sell, and I thought, what can I do to make it less about the landscape as a character and more about introducing the characters in the beginning. So I'm also wrestling with what is a memoir, and what is truth, and what is story, and what do people want to read, and how do they want to read it. And so I went from writing something that I wanted to write to rearranging it so maybe people want to read it when they pick it up. So I'm kind of just wrestling with all the things that writers wrestle with.
Yeah.
So, thanks for that question, Jim. Yeah.
I think I heard you refer to the poverty of time. You said you have a family. You said you're in a number of ways busy, and you're not a linear thinker. So, when do you write? Is there a certain time of weekday, month, year?
When do you write? Sorry, I just want to know.
In the very early morning.
Very early
But I don't have any of those other,
Yeah.
I don't know whether demands or duties or desires. So it's easy for me to find the time.
So when I write has changed. I think that changes for a lot of us. And when I was in graduate school, I had only male thesis mentors, and they always told me I had to write every day. And I tried to write every day, but it just didn't really work for me because I didn't for my writing process. And when I had children, I absolutely cannot write every day. And then I just felt like a giant failure for a number of years when my children were small, because I had their mentorship in my head. You have to write every day, which works for many, many people. But it didn't work for me when my children were small, and so I kind of just felt like, for a while I floundered, and then I learned that I could write while I was walking. I learned that I could take a recorder, and so I would strap my baby to my chest, and I would take the recorder, and I would say, Zoe, tree, that's a tree, and then I would tell her about things, and I would kind of pause and record things into the recorder. And so pretty soon she was saying, we'd be walking along, and she'd go, hi, tree, and she was doing the things that I was doing, she was talking to the world, but I would write a little bit into that recorder. And then I found that I could write a little bit, like Barbara Kingsolver, right when they napped. And then it was a number of years before they were really functioning enough as adults that I could, or as children, they're now 13 and 10. But functioning enough that I could write in other times. And so I would sometimes write 2 in the morning, I would sometimes write at 4 in the morning if I got up early, which I got no practice of doing for a while. And then I got out of practice for that for a while. And then I would write while I was driving. I would write into a voice recorder while driving. I would say, Siri, take a note. And Siri would take notes, and then later I would shape that into an essay. And I did that for about 3 years. So my writing times have changed and shifted with the demands of my life. And so when I write now, at this moment, I have barely written in the past 2 or 3 months. I just haven't had any time in the past 2 or 3 months. And that used to just make me feel like I wasn't a writer. Well, I'm not writing, so I must not be a writer. And I think I have too many voices in my head. And now I just say, I'm gathering material when I go on a walk, and I go on a run, or I read a book, or I spend time in a room. This is writing. This is part of my writing process. And I'm gathering it up. And when I sit down later, I will have an essay, or I will have a poem, and I'm not going to feel guilty because I don't have a perfect routine. And I am kind of a routines person. I like to run every day. I like to, I'm really into flossing. I have some things that are big routines for me. I love to read every day. The children read every day. Those kinds of things. But writing for me now, before the last 3 months, was happening. I would choose a day of the week when I would tell myself that in the morning until noon I didn't do any emails or academic work, and I would write from whenever the children were finally out the door until noon. And then I can do my academic work. So I was kind of choosing half days on my schedule. And I'm kind of hungry right now for a break, from work, and my plan is to someday take a break. The gift and privilege of a tenured position is that you can take a sabbatical supposedly when your university funds them. So eventually, when the university is funding sabbaticals again, I'll take one of those, and I'm planning to use every day to write, whether it be early morning hours, which is when I'm writing now when I do. I say haven't written at all, but actually last week I got up at 4 one morning and wrote for 2 hours. And actually another morning I got up at 3 and wrote for an hour. So okay, I wrote for 3 hours last week, from 3 to 4 and 4 to 6. But I don't have a very good routine at the moment. And I like telling people that, because I think it gives you permission to take breaks. Taking breaks is so good for your process.
Well, this is to you and to Jen. I'm Janice, and I live here in Tieton, and I am not a writer. I'm an artist and an illustrator, and something really neat happened to me last year, and it was Linda and Elaine approached me and asked to use some of my artwork for the cover of their book. And first of all, I'd love to do more of that. It never occurred to me. But then when you were talking, I had this kind of what I thought was a brilliant idea. And what
It's a
about
brilliant idea.
what about a workshop at LiTFUSE where you get some of the local artists to collaborate during LiTFUSE, and we could, you know, they could write and I could illustrate, and like we could have, you know, some pairs of those people.
Would you do it live?
Yeah,
So, you know, like the round.
I'll do it right here.
Yeah,
I'm a
because you're
drawer.
probably doing it right now.
Yeah. So people, you know, but anyway, I think that really excited me. I never really thought of a way to participate in LiTFUSE because I could
She's
drop my pen.
non-verbal,
Yeah,
as you can tell.
I'm really verbal. I love to talk. Anyway, but like I just thought, oh, that would be so fun to hook me up with somebody I didn't even know, and they handed me their poem they just wrote, and I would like do some on-the-spot illustration, and you could put them all together at the end of LiTFUSE, and wouldn't that be fun, Jen?
That would be amazing. You could take the ones from the workshops and have them go from a workshop to a room full of artists, and be like, take your new poem to the artist.
Yes, and I happen to know a room full of artists, so, you know, anyway, and I thank Lynette Lane for like doing that for me, because it just never, I mean, it never occurred to me, you know, and, anyway, it's cool. So if anybody wants me to illustrate your chapbook, just have at it, you know, I'm just kidding, but I'm not kidding.
So you're not kidding.
No, I'm not
That's
kidding.
how, this is how it happened.
Yeah,
This is how
yeah.
it happened, you know, hundreds of years ago and 100 years ago in the surrealist salons, and this is how it happens now, probably in many rooms in Tieton and Helensburgh, and, right, people,
Yeah.
Jompa does. That's what Jompa does.
Yeah.
I love the idea that at LiTFUSE, and I don't wanna like go on about it, but there's this thing called a round. Some of you have been in these where you get a writer, a musician, and a visual artist. And they're creating live and around, and people sit around them. So it's like they're in like a fishbowl, and you have, sometimes the poet will bring, or the writer will bring something they composed, and they'll start by reading it, and they'll read a portion of it. Then they'll pause, and while they're talking, the artist will be painting or drawing while they're speaking. And then after you pause, and then you just watch the artist for a while. Just watch them do their work, in or out, and after 10 minutes, you move to the musician. And the musician sometimes freestyles and just starts freestyling based on what they just heard. So they freestyle for a while, and then they pause, and then sometimes the writer reads what they composed, and sometimes they just riff and respond. So it depends on the people you get, but you get people from 3 different disciplines, and they just create them around. And then at the end of it, usually they sell the art, and they have all the artists speak together, like have a conversation about what just happened. And it's just the audience is watching them from the outside. It's a really, really cool experience. I've only been to a few of them, but they're really fun. I think we're about out of time, aren't we?
Maybe one more question?
Okay, great. I didn't want to.
Last question? Last chance? Okay.
I'll totally come to that.
Okay.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, let's